Okay, so let's dive into this material you've built together. It really offers a different perspective on money, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. It shifts the focus away from, the typical spreadsheets and formulas.
Right, and much more towards behavior, our psychology, how our own past experiences just completely mold how we deal with money.
Absolutely. And the core idea that just leaps out is that doing well with money, it has surprisingly little to do with raw intelligence.
Yeah, it's almost all about how you behave.
Exactly. And behavior, well, that's the tricky bit, isn't it?
It is. It's really hard to teach. Hard to learn sometimes, even for incredibly smart people. Which explains why we see these financial choices that, from the outside, just look, well, irrational.
Right. It's not necessarily a lack of smarts. It's often a behavioral gap.
You can have someone absolutely brilliant in their career, a real leader, but they get totally tripped up by their financial habits.
And then the flip side, you see people from, pretty ordinary backgrounds who build amazing financial success. Why? Because they nail a few key behaviors consistently.
The contrast in the sources is really something. You've got this story of this super intelligent executive who went completely broke, and that detail about him smashing a $500 lamp in a restaurant just because he could afford any price, and handing over like a brick of cash.
Yes, $5,000. It just screams impulsive, ego-driven behavior. That's a huge red flag. Doesn't matter how high your IQ is.
And then you contrast that with Ronald Reed.
Oh, his story is fantastic. A janitor, worked at a gas station, never earned a big salary, nothing like that.
Just by saving consistently, patiently, simple investing over like decades.
Decades, yeah. He quietly built up over $8 million, became this major philanthropist after he died. Nobody knew while he was alive, really.
That's the real puzzle, isn't it? How does the janitor end up with $8 million while the high-flying executive crashes and burns?
And the sources are clear. It wasn't about the starting point or the fancy degrees. It boiled down to their behavior, their habits with money.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. Let's really dig into this idea that money isn't like physics, with fixed rules.
Right, it's much more like psychology. It's messy, full of emotion, personal quirks, surprises.
And we want to use this material to understand why we act the way we do about money, and maybe what that means for you listening right now.
Okay, so let's start right there. Why does behavior beat brains, and how does our personal past shape all this?
Let's go back to those stories. Ronald Reed versus the executive.
Well, the sources really emphasize that Reed's wealth came from honestly pretty simple habits. Saving regularly, being patient.
Sticking with what he knew long-term.
Yeah, investing in familiar companies, avoiding debt, not needing flashy things. These aren't complex algorithms, right? They're behavioral skills. Discipline.
And that just hits on such a critical point. Knowing the right thing to do with money. That's completely different from what goes on in your head when you actually try to do it.
Oh, totally. We all know we should save more, but spending feels good right now.
Or we know panic selling is a terrible idea, but in that moment, the fear just takes over.
Exactly. And this is where your own personal experiences become so incredibly powerful. The sources argue pretty strongly that what you've lived through with money shapes your views way more than anything you just read in a book or hear someone talk about.
Your own unique economic life, even if it's just a tiny sliver of what's happened globally, becomes your anchor. It heavily influences how you see risk, saving, investing, everything.
Think about it. Growing up poor versus growing up wealthy. That creates totally different attitudes towards risk, what you prioritize.
We're living through really high inflation, like in the 70s, versus only knowing stable prices. That leaves a permanent mark.
Someone starting their career in the Great Depression is going to view markets fundamentally differently than, say, a tech worker who only experienced the dot-com boom years. Their baseline reality is different.
It's like comparing an Australian who hasn't seen a recession in 30 years with an American who's lived through several big ones.
Their gut feeling about stability, about risk, completely different because their lived history is different.
It's like our brains just hardwire these things. There's that study mentioned, Malmendier and Nagel.
Yeah, that one provides real academic weight to this. It confirms people's willingness to take financial risks is heavily influenced by the investment returns they personally experienced during their lives, much more than by education or just general smarts.
Like Bill Gross, the bond king. He saw this massive bull market in bonds for most of his career. That shaped his view very differently than, say, his father's generation who watched inflation eat away bond values.
Right. And understanding this helps make sense of behaviors that might otherwise look, well, crazy. Like why people in lower income groups spend so much on lottery tickets.
Yeah, to someone financially secure, spending, hundreds a year on almost zero chance of winning, it seems like terrible financial planning, especially if they struggle with basic savings.
But the sources suggest looking at it from their perspective. For many in those situations, the realistic chance of significantly boosting their income or saving enough for a comfortable retirement or affording big things like vacations through normal means, it feels completely impossible, out of reach.
So buying that lottery ticket isn't really about making a smart investment calculation.
No, it's more like paying a small price for a moment of hope, for the tangible dream of getting the kind of comfort and security that others just take for granted.
And when you look at it like that, given their experience, their reality, it actually makes a certain kind of sense.
Exactly, and that's a powerful takeaway here. Nobody is inherently crazy. We all make financial choices that seem perfectly logical to us based on our unique history and how we see the world.
That shift in perspective is so important. Takes the judgment right out. Helps understand the behavior.
Okay, speaking of things that are hard to really wrap your head around rationally, let's talk compounding.
Compounding. The eighth wonder, right.
Mm-hmm.
But our brains, they're just not wired for it. We get linear thinking. Add a bit more.
But exponential growth. When things double and double again and again, the numbers just explode. It's hard to grasp intuitively.
The Ice Age analogy in the sources is brilliant for this. You don't need a sudden catastrophe. An ice age can start just because one summer's a tiny bit cooler and a patch of snow doesn't melt.
Right, and that little patch reflects sunlight, makes it colder next winter, so more snow survives the next summer.
And on and on. That tiny, seemingly linear change, just repeating and amplifying over time, eventually covers continents in mile-high ice. That's compounding.
And Warren Buffett's fortune. That's the ultimate financial ice sheet.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just that he's a genius investor. Plenty of people have actually had higher average returns, but for shorter times. His secret weapon is time. He started young, as a kid basically, and he's just kept at it for decade after decade after decade, letting that snowball grow.
Mm-hmm. They contrast him with Jim Simons from Renaissance Technologies. Phenomenal returns, better than Buffett's on average.
But he started his serious investing much later in life. So even with higher returns, the total wealth he built is way less than Buffett's.
Buffett's huge fortune is overwhelmingly down to the compounding effect, having a good base grow for an incredibly long time.
Which leads us nicely to another really crucial, kind of uncomfortable idea from the sources.
Mm-hmm.
Luck and risk.
Yeah, they're described as siblings, these forces outside our control that play a massive role in how things turn out, beyond just effort or skill.
And they're so hard for us to really measure or even just accept. It's not comfortable thinking success or failure isn't purely down to us.
No, it isn't. The Bill Gates versus Ken Evans story is a powerful example. Same school, same passion for computers, same early access, both brilliant, driven.
One becomes, Bill Gates. The other tragically dies in a climbing accident before he even graduates high school.
Luck, good and bad, it played a huge part in their different paths. But it's awkward to talk about.
Yeah, if you attribute someone else's success too much to luck, you sound jealous.
Right. And if you attribute your own success mainly to luck, well, it can feel like you're diminishing all your hard work. Even though studies, like the one showing brothers' incomes are highly correlated, suggest background and circumstance play this massive, often unseen role.
Successful people often don't see how much those factors applied to them.
And judging failure is just as messy, isn't it?
Totally. Was that failed business a bad decision? Or was it a perfectly reasonable risk that just didn't pan out? The unfortunate side of the odds.
Was buying that stock that tanked a mistake, or were you just unlucky this time? It's often impossible to really know for sure.
We tend to see others' failures as bad decisions because we weren't inside their head, we don't know the pressures or the reasoning.
But our own failures, oh, that was bad luck, or, just the cost of taking necessary risks, we can always construct a narrative where our choice made sense at the time.
The sources share some great stories where that line between being bold and skilled versus reckless and lucky is just razor thin looking back.
Like Cornelius Vanderbilt building his railroad empire. He apparently just broke laws left and right, basically dared people to stop him saying, "Hey, I got the power!"
It worked. Made him a legend. But it could easily have gone the other way. Landed him in jail.
Or Benjamin Graham, Mr. Value Investing himself. His biggest win ever was Geico. But he put so much into it, it completely violated his own diversification rules.
And he even admitted later he couldn't tell if it was just pure luck or a moment of supreme insight? Can we even tell them apart sometimes?
Exactly. Even the masters struggle to perfectly separate skill, risk, and luck after the fact.
And grappling with that uncertainty, accepting that some things are outside your control, that seems vital for what the sources call the single most important word in finance: survival.
Absolutely. Compounding is amazing, but it needs time. You have to survive to benefit from it. You have to endure the downturns, the surprises, the times when things just go wrong. For years, decades.
Endurance is the bedrock.
Right. Look at Sequoia Capital, the venture firm. Huge success over 40-plus years. How? Not by being arrogant know-it-alls. Their core value is basically being afraid of going out of business.
They stay paranoid.
Yeah, paranoid, never complacent, always assuming things will change. Why? So they can survive to keep investing, keep playing the game long term.
And surviving means not getting wiped out financially, not being forced to sell everything when markets crash, not making rash decisions out of desperation. Which brings us to this idea of enough.
Ah, yes, the Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller story at that billionaire's party.
Right, Heller says to Vonnegut, "I have something he will never have." Vonnegut asks what? Heller says, "Enough."
It's such a powerful thought in a world obsessed with more, more, more.
And the story of Rajat Gupta is just such a stark warning. Here's a guy already worth $100 million. More money than most people can even imagine.
But he was hanging out with billionaires. And suddenly, $100 million didn't feel like enough compared to them.
That feeling, that gap, needing more, it drove him to risk everything. His fortune, his reputation, his freedom, insider trading, all for more.
It reminds me of Buffett's comment on the long-term capital management collapse. Those brilliant guys risked what they had and needed.
For what they didn't have and didn't need.
Buffett just called it plain foolish.
The problem is that social comparison ladder, it just keeps going up, doesn't it? In our connected world, you can never truly reach the top. There's always someone with more.
Always. So the only way to actually win that game is to just not play. To decide for yourself that you have enough, even if your neighbor has more.
Because that insatiable hunger for more, the sources warn, it just pushes you to take bigger and bigger risks until eventually you probably end up regretting it.
So, if the ultimate goal isn't just endless piling up of wealth or winning some unwinnable comparison game, what is the biggest benefit money can buy?
The sources make a really compelling argument that it's control over your time.
Yes. Just the ability to wake up in the morning and say, I get to decide what I do today, when I do it, who I do it with, for how long. That autonomy, that independence, priceless.
It offers a kind of freedom that very few luxury goods can actually match.
The author's story about that investment banking internship nails it. Chasing the big money, thinking wealth was the prize.
But the reality was zero control over his time, his life.
Yeah.
Misery.
And contrast that with Derek Sivers. Had just $12,000 saved up, but decided that was enough to quit his job, pursue music. Why? Because that 12 carat bought him freedom, control over his days.
Sivers said even selling his company later for way more money didn't feel as impactful as that moment, at 22, when 12 grand bought him his independence.
It just highlights that money's real power isn't just the amount, but its ability to buy you options, flexibility, autonomy.
The sources link this to a strange situation in the U.S. We're richer than ever, technically. Buying more stuff, bigger houses.
Yeah, even adjusting for inflation, we have more material wealth than past generations.
But happiness studies, they suggest we might be less happy, more stressed, feeling less control over our lives than people in some other developed countries.
How does that make sense? Well, one theory is we've used that extra income to buy things and lifestyles that actually trap us. They require us to work harder, longer hours, sacrificing control over our time.
And the nature of work itself has changed dramatically. Think back to the 50s, mostly physical labor jobs. You clocked out, work was done.
No, so much is knowledge work. Like Rockefeller's job back then, the main tool is your head.
And your head is always with you. The work never really shuts off. Emails at night, thinking about projects during dinner, waking up at 3 a.m. stressing.
The computer age gave us flexibility, sure, but it also meant the factories basically everywhere, all the time.
Which brings us to another weird paradox the sources explore. The paradox of spending.
Right. We often chase wealth, partly because we think it'll make people like us, admire us, respect us.
So we buy the fancy car, the big house, the designer labels, thinking people will look at us and be impressed.
But the irony is, when someone sees your expensive car, they're usually not thinking, wow, look how cool that person is.
What are they thinking?
They're probably thinking, wow, if I had that car, people would think I was cool. They're using your spending as a measuring stick for their own desires, their own wish for admiration.
That's a really powerful insight. It suggests that maybe things like just being decent, kind, empathetic, that probably earns you more genuine respect than any flashy possession ever could.
Exactly. And this ties into another key idea. Real wealth is often the stuff you don't see.
Like the valet parking the Ferrari. You assume the owner must be loaded.
But the sources point out often those cars belong to people who maybe had moderate success but spent a huge chunk of their money or even went into debt just for that car. It's visible spending, not necessarily deep wealth.
And Ronald Reed, the janitor. He's the perfect example of hidden wealth. Nobody saw him as a financial role model during his life. They just saw a frugal guy.
His wealth was totally invisible, tucked away in savings and investments, until his will revealed it all after he passed.
That invisibility really underscores how crucial saving is. The sources argue pretty forcefully that building wealth, it has way less to do with how much you earn or even getting amazing investment returns.
And almost everything to do with your savings rate, how much you consistently put away.
Wealth is just the leftovers, right? The money you earn but don't spend, accumulated over time.
The analogy to the 1970s energy crisis is great here. The U.S. didn't really solve it just by finding more oil. The big gains came from becoming way more energy efficient, using less energy for every dollar of GDP.
So your financial well-being depends less on finding more oil, earning more and more on your efficiency, how much you save from what you earn, your frugality.
You can get wealthy on a modest income if you save like crazy, but it's almost impossible to build wealth no matter how high your income if you spend it all.
And ultimately, the real value of the wealth you do build is relative to what you actually need or want to spend. Fewer needs means that wealth provides more security, more control.
Which leads to a really important distinction the sources make. The difference between being purely rational on paper and being reasonable in the real world.
Because money decisions aren't just math problems. They happen in real life. They involve emotions, spouses, neighbors.
Right. Harry Markowitz won a Nobel for figuring out the mathematically rational way to build a portfolio. But how did he invest his own retirement money?
He split it 50-50,
Yep.
stocks and bonds.
Why? Not because it was the absolute optimal mix, according to his models, but because, he said, it was the allocation he felt he could actually live with, the one that would minimize his future regret, whether the market went way up or way down.
It wasn't purely rational, but it was reasonable for him. A human trying to sleep at night.
That's the key. Investing happens at the kitchen table, worrying about the future. A strategy that looks brilliant on a spreadsheet, like using tons of leverage, borrowing to amplify gains, but risking getting totally wiped out.
Yeah, the spreadsheet might say, okay, get wiped out, just start over. Rational, maybe, in infinite time.
But completely unreasonable for a real person. People can't just emotionally shrug off losing their life savings. They panic, they quit, they give up. It's devastating.
So the argument is, sometimes it's okay to make choices that aren't the absolute, statistically perfect, rational optimum, if they're reasonable for you as a human.
Like maybe investing a bit in a company you really believe in, even if it's not the best stock on paper. That connection might help you stick with it when things get tough.
Or having a home bias, preferring investments in your own country. Not perfectly rational for diversification, maybe, but if it makes you more comfortable and actually gets you to invest, reasonable.
Even, dare I say, a tiny bit of stock picking or day trading on the side. If it satisfies that urge to gamble a little, uses only money you can afford to lose, and stops you from messing up your main sensible portfolio, maybe that's reasonable for some people.
And making forecasts. We know they're usually wrong, but trying to anticipate the future is just human nature. It's reasonable as long as we don't bet the farm on those predictions being right.
My favorite example is Jack Bogle, Mr. Vanguard, the ultimate champion of low-cost, rational index funds.
Right.
He admitted he put some of his own money into his son's actively managed higher-fee fund. Rationally. Made no sense according to his own gospel.
But reasonably. Supporting your family. Sometimes that trumps spreadsheet optimization.
Exactly. It shows that good financial decisions aren't always about maximizing every last penny. They're about finding what works for you, what you can stick with, what helps you sleep at night, and what aligns with your actual life goals and values.
Okay, so navigating this requires understanding ourselves, but also understanding the world, right? And how looking at history can sometimes be, well, tricky.
Yeah, the sources warn against treating financial history like it's set in stone, like geology, where past layers predict the future perfectly. Finance, economies, they change, they evolve.
Things like the invention of 401ks, Roth IRAs, the whole venture capital industry. These didn't exist a few decades ago. They fundamentally altered the landscape for saving, investing, building wealth.
Benjamin Graham, back in his day, had to keep updating his formulas because the market kept changing. Towards the end, he even felt that super detailed analysis of individual companies was becoming less useful because the world was just moving too fast.
Yeah, so while that phrase, "it's different this time," is usually a warning sign for investors.
Sometimes. It is
Yeah.
actually different. And those structural shifts, those real changes, they're often what matter most for the long run.
And what really drives history and the economy are often these unpredictable tail events.
Exactly, those rare, huge outliers. World War II, 9/11, the internet, mRNA vaccines, things nobody really saw coming, but they changed everything.
So just looking at past worst-case scenarios assumes nothing new and unprecedented will happen. But the world is surprising.
Kahneman's point is key. When you're surprised, the lesson isn't just my prediction was wrong, it's the world is harder to predict than I thought. That builds crucial humility.
This ties into why pessimism seems to have such a grip on us, especially financial pessimism.
The sources point out we just seem drawn to bad news. Pessimism often sounds smarter, more sophisticated, more cautious.
Whereas true optimism, not just blind hope, but believing the long-term odds favor progress despite setbacks, often gets dismissed.
Right. Real optimism is believing most people want to improve things, and that compounds over time, like money. But who gets the headlines?
Remember that Russian professor in 2008, Igor Panarin, predicting the U.S. would break into 6 pieces. Front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Exactly. Apocalyptic forecasts grab attention. Extreme optimism. Predicting Japan's post-war boom or the stock market's amazing long run, usually ignored or laughed at initially.
So why is financial pessimism so easy, so persuasive?
Several reasons. One, money affects everyone, so bad financial news gets immediate widespread attention. Two, progress is usually slow, gradual, almost invisible day to day.
Like the steady decline in heart disease deaths over decades.
Right. But setbacks, they're often fast, dramatic, highly visible. Think about a plane crash versus the millions of safe flights.
Bad news makes better stories.
And negative narratives, especially based on recent bad events like the 2008 crisis, are powerful and stick around even after things start getting better. That fear lingers.
Plus, desperation makes people vulnerable.
Definitely. Whether it's someone facing a terrible illness turning to medical quackery or sophisticated investors handing money to Bernie Madoff because he told them a simple, too-good-to-be-true story they desperately wanted to believe.
Understanding all these dynamics, our own biases, the way narratives work, seems absolutely critical for navigating money decisions.
So, okay, let's try to pull this all together. Based on this material, what are the real actionable lessons for you listening?
Okay, first one. Respect luck and risk. They're huge. Focus on what you can control, mostly your own behavior, your reactions, and stay humble. Less ego, more wealth.
Second, saving is king. It's the gap between your income and your ego, that urge to spend, to keep up, or show off. Remember, wealth is often what you don't spend. Prioritize future flexibility.
Third, it's okay for things to go wrong sometimes. That's part of investing. Don't obsess over individual winners or losers. Look at your whole portfolio. Stick to your plan. See volatility and doubt as the price you pay for potential long-term gains, like a fee, not a fine.
Fourth, remember money's highest dividend. Control over your time. Use money to buy independence, flexibility. That's often worth more than just more stuff.
Fifth, be nicer, less flashy. Kindness, humility, empathy. Those earn more lasting respect than possessions.
Sixth, save just for the sake of saving. You don't always need a specific goal right away. Building that cushion of uncommitted cash. That's buying options, buying resilience against life's inevitable surprises. Pure optionality.
Seventh, tied to that, worship room for error, margin of safety. It's not about being timid, it's about ensuring you survive long enough for compounding to work its magic. Endurance matters.
And eighth, avoid financial extremes. Your goals will change. Your desires will change. You'll change. That's the end of history illusion. Thinking who you are now is who you'll always be. Extreme decisions today often lead to regret later. Stay flexible.
The author's own example is really bringing this home, right? Like deliberately not letting his lifestyle inflate with raises, keeping a big cash buffer.
Yeah, those aren't about squeezing out the absolute maximum theoretical return. They're about prioritizing independence, sleeping well, avoiding being forced to sell at the worst time. They're reasonable choices focused on survival and peace of mind.
And that really is the central theme, isn't it? Good financial decisions aren't always the purely rational ones on paper. They're the ones that are reasonable for you, that you can stick with, that help you reach your goals while staying sane.
And
expectation that pretty much everyone could achieve a solid middle-class life with rising consumption.
But then, starting maybe in the 70s or 80s, income inequality really started widening. The top earners pulled way ahead, setting new, much higher benchmarks for what success looked like.
But those earlier expectations of a broadly shared rising lifestyle didn't just disappear. People still felt they should be able to afford certain things, amplified by media and advertising.
And at the same time, taking on debt became more normalized, more acceptable, so people stretched. Bigger mortgages, more car debt, student loans, often just trying to keep up with expectations formed in a previous economic era.
Which created this weird situation. People might have more assets on paper, like a house, but feel less secure because they're carrying so much debt, especially hitting lower and middle income families hard.
It's a stark example of how our expectations can lag way behind a changing economic reality.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the psychology, the behavior, the history behind money, what's the bottom line for you, the listener?
I think it's recognizing that your financial journey is less about mastering complex formulas and much more about understanding yourself, your emotions, your biases, the unique experiences that have shaped how you see money. Your personal history is real and valid, but being aware of how it influences your choices today, that's absolutely key.
So given how easily our expectations can get stuck in the past, while the world keeps surprising us, here's a final thought to maybe chew on. What beliefs do you hold about money, about success, about what you should have or achieve that might actually be rooted in a version of the world that doesn't quite exist anymore? And how might those potential or outdated beliefs be quietly shaping your financial path right now?
Thank you for listening. If you found value in this audio, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful content on motivation, habits, and wealth building. New audiobooks and summaries are uploaded every week, so stay tuned and keep growing. This is Neural Wealth,